Alireza Firouzja is an attacking machine with the Jobava London system in this game against fellow Super Grandmaster Linyer Dominguez, a very strong opponent. Currently 17th in the world. Firouzja is 6th in the world. Firouzja has white. Linyer Dominguez has black. Let's jump right in. D4 is played by Alireza. Knight F6, Knight C3, D5, and Bishop to F4, the traditional starting position of the Jobava London system for black. And Alireza's threat is to play knight to b5, followed by knight c7 check, forking the king and the queen. So in order to prevent that, black usually plays, and does in this game, a6. That keeps this knight on c3 out of the b5 square and keeps it from attacking c7 and forking the king and the rook. E3 is played, c5, immediately attacking the center, knight to f3, and c to d4. This is okay for black here because the dark squared bishop is outside of the pawn chain. This exchange is good for black because this pawn cannot easily defend d4 after the exchange. Knight to c6, putting pressure on d4, and knight to e5, jumping right in. And if bishop to d7, then later on white can grab that bishop and get the bishop pair. If bishop to f5, then white can play g4 immediately, gaining space and attacking on the king side. So e6 was played by Grandmaster Dominguez. Knight takes c6, pawn takes. So there's a weakness on a6, and also this c5 square is a bit weak, so the knight can go to a4 and maybe even land on that square. Firouzja plays knight to a4 immediately to control the c5 square. He doesn't want to play knight to c5 just yet, but he wants to control it, keep that pawn from advancing. The bishop goes to d6. They're exchanged. And bishop to d3. Again, you don't want to play knight c5 just yet because black can just play knight to d7 and challenge it right away. So he plays the bishop to d3, placing the bishop on its most effective attacking diagonal, aiming at h7. And here, Grandmaster Dominguez plays a5, a strong idea. Obviously, this bishop on c8 is not a very good piece right now. So he wants to allow that bishop to go to a6 and challenge the bishop on d3. Trade a bishop that's not very effective for a bishop that is effective. Castles and bishop to a6, just as we mentioned. Bishop takes bishop, rook takes a6. White captured because at least that misplaces the rook a little bit. And now rook to e1, placing the rook opposite the king, but the king can castle next move. And it may look like white doesn't have enough going on to attack. Well, let's watch and see. Black does castle. So now, trying to put ourselves in Firouzja's shoes, how do we attack? Well, we have 4 pieces here, a knight, a queen, and 2 rooks. How do we get those pieces in attacking position as quickly and efficiently as possible? How does Alireza do it? Well, rook to e3 is his first move. Starting a rook lift. This rook, I mean, it could go to the queen side, but we really want it coming over here to the king side and aiming at the black king. Rook to a7, c3 to solidify the center. And now knight to d7. Black wants to play c6, c5 and liquidate that weakness. However, by moving the knight away from f6, he relinquishes control over the g4 square. So Firouzja immediately moves the queen to g4, aiming it directly at Dominguez's king. Rook to c7, he continues his plan of advancing the c-pawn. Now rook to g3. Now we can see how he's maneuvering his pieces into an attacking position. Obviously, he's aiming at g7, threatening mate. We know Dominguez isn't going to allow that. But it does force g6, and now there's a weakness of some dark squares around black's king. The queen goes into h4, maybe rook h3 can threaten mate again. Dominguez goes ahead and plays e5. He breaks with the other pawn in the center of the board. The e5, knight e5, the rook comes back to e3, the knight goes to d7. Now rook a to e1. So now the rooks are doubled on the only fully open file. So that's a strategic victory for Firouzja. And here, Dominguez plays knight to f6. Now, if you look at Alireza's pieces, the worst placed piece easily is this knight on a4. It's completely offside. Not only is it on the side of the board, nothing's really going on the queen side for white. Black's knight, on the other hand, at f6 is actually well positioned for defense. It could hop into e4, etc. And that's what makes Alireza's next move so powerful. Knight to c5. it looks like the knight is hanging. Of course, he's controlling this key square on e4. It looks like the knight is hanging, but in fact, it is not, because if Dominguez were to take it, then white would take this knight, and Firouzja would be thrilled with exchanging that knight on a4 with the knight that was on f6. So Dominguez plays the knight to d7 first. The rook goes back to h3, again aiming at mate at h7, excuse me. Black plays h5 in response. Now knight to d3. Now, that knight that was offside, he says, I don't want to trade it now. It's in a position to attack, so I want to use it for an attack. The knight comes back to f6. Rook h to e3, again controlling the file. King to g7 and h3. Not only does that keep the knight out of g4, perhaps white could play g4 himself and use that g-pawn for an attack. So here Dominguez plays c5. He feels like he's consolidated enough on the king side that he can begin to advance his central pawns, but it may be a little too soon. He is definitely making these pawns easier to attack for Alireza. The knight goes to f4. The threat is queen to g7 followed by rook to e6. And if this pawn takes the rook, then g6 would collapse. So Alireza has some pretty serious threats developing on the board. d4 is played, and now queen to g3. A very nice tactic. The threat is knight takes h5 check, and then queen takes queen. So Alireza is threatening to win the queen right now by playing knight to h5 check. So Dominguez has to do something about that. He defends the queen with rook to d7. And now another hammer blow from Alireza. Boom, rook to e6. That doesn't even look possible, but it is. And the reason is if pawn takes, then rook takes again. And when the queen moves, queen to g6 check, king to h8. And this line does lead to a clear winning endgame for Firouzja after rook takes knight, check, king g8, queen e6. The knight comes to d3 to come up and pile up on this rook on f7. The king moves, the knight moves. And after some moves, there's a fork forcing black to give up the rook for the knight. And this endgame is winning for white. If black plays d3, then after a series of checks, he would pick up the d-pawn. So instead of going through all of that, maybe Dominguez intuitively knew it would be bad. That's obviously a long variation I used assisted with computers. He says, I'm just going to play the queen back to b8 and avoid any complications. Now, rook takes f6 could have been played here, and that actually was the strongest move, as computers show us. After king takes f6, queen to h4 check, king g7, and this shot, knight to h5 check. And if the knight is captured, queen check, after a series of checks, then rook to e4 with the threat of rook h4, basically just winning the game on the spot. But this was a 10-minute game for each side, so Firouzja does not see that. He plays rook 6 to e5. Queen takes b2, taking twice on d4. Rook comes into e7. Rook takes e7, rook e7, queen b1, king h2, and king to g8. Now, black has fought very hard, and he's fought back to equality after all of that pressure that Alireza had on him. And Firouzja plays rook to e5. But one of the downsides of having to defend for a long series of moves is that it becomes easier and easier to make a mistake after each move. And here Dominguez does make a mistake. He plays the rook to e8, obviously looking to trade it off with the knight supporting that rook. However, there's a tactical shot that Firouzja has here, and he plays it. And that's the move knight to d5. Drawing away the defender of the rook, and if the knight takes, it's with check. By the way, just for the record, knight to h5 also works. But knight to d5 was played in the game. After rook e5, knight to f6 is with check. And after king g7, queen takes e5, we can see he has won a piece. Queen to f5 was played by Dominguez, but before Alireza was able to respond, he resigned. The natural follow-up would just be to take the queen. After pawn takes, knight takes, king f8, knight to f4. He's up a piece. The knight controls d3. A very strong win and an impressive win by Firouzja against a fellow super grandmaster in the Jobava London system. I hope you've enjoyed the game. See you again soon at Chess Dog. Goodbye.